With that, something I so believe in our community is that the most interesting people are not the people who are just on stage. And the things I do not find interesting about a church is who's the pastor and what's the music like and how big is the thing. What I found interesting about a community is who are the people? What are their narratives? What is their stories of compassion and grace and justice and their own brokenness and figuring it out and the imperfect process of what it means for them to be human? And so every week we create multiple opportunities, whether it's meeting an interesting person or our conversation time, so that we can hear from one another. That it's crucial that we hear each other's experiences, the diversity of one another's narratives, and in doing so, we hear more clearly who God is, and that God is so beyond each and every one of us individually, but corporately, who we are as human beings. So today, our meeting interesting person is a first name greatest, last name ever, Laura Browder, everybody. Oh, come on, Laura Browder.
I feel so seen and loved because you used the Drake reference to introduce
well,
me. So.
When you're woke, you're woke. You know, what can I say?
Relevant. Man.
I'm so relevant for the kids out there. So, yeah.
Wokest pastor of 2019 and 2020.
Wow,
right here, Corey
you
Marquez.
So much. Please feel free to tag me with that hashtag. Laura you're somebody who has like that presence. I think any room that you walk into, it's probably why you're also like a spin instructor, because you're just getting people amped for life, just going for it. I appreciate that about you, and I always value people where we can just say ridiculous things together, which we have clearly done, and highly inappropriate, but also that you can, on the same spectrum, talk about extremely difficult things and deep things. And you've been on a big journey over the last year as you've honored who you are, as you've come out to family, all kinds of other big stuff. So without that further ado, you, Laura Browder, everybody. All right.
Wow. Thanks, Corey. Thanks.
Yeah.
So, hi guys. My name is Laura. I'm originally from Dallas, and no pressure when they're like, you're trying to be interesting today. It's like, all right, well, what makes me interesting? And I think for me, it's everything that's happened to me since I've been in LA. So after college, I lived in Australia for 4 years, and then I got asked to come to LA to help start this nonprofit. And when I came out here, someone quickly was like, you should be our volleyball coach. And I was like, that's really random because I've never played volleyball, and I don't know the rules, and what is that line on the court, and they're like, no, it's fine, just interview. So I was like, all right, whatever, I needed a job. Next thing you know it, I'm coaching volleyball, 4 kids show up, I'm getting on YouTube every day, learning all the things, learning all the positions. Fast forward a couple years later, I'm coaching now at one of the best high schools in the area. I'm now coaching at the #1 club in Los Angeles. It's ranked in the top 10 in America. And it's all been one big joke because I was just like, God, I've never envisioned this. But the reason why I bring that up is because God knew exactly what he was doing when he asked me to come to LA and coach volleyball. Because I spent most of my life being very performance driven. I spent most of my life being very achievement driven. I'm a freaking 3 on the Enneagram. So I want to freaking wake up and eat success for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And then I want to do it all again tomorrow. You know what I mean? Anyways, I need to calm down. And the thing about volleyball is every day I went to my job and I felt inadequate. I was coaching with all these Division I players, and I'm over here. I had not only never played, but I'm actually terrible. Like, I'm quite athletic at every other sport, but volleyball. And it's like so humiliating for me, especially as a 3, that I'm like, I can't play this sport. And yet I keep getting elevated in it, and it's like embarrassing. But I'm thankful for that time, because I didn't realize how much of my identity, how much of my worth, how much of my value was coming out of what I do. And so here I was for the last 5.5 years coaching a sport I never played, didn't know anything about, and I'm terrible at. And it gave me the space to kind of take a step back and be like, wait, who am I outside of what I'm doing? Who am I outside of task? And for the first time, I was 27, 28 years old, I began to get more in touch with myself, my sense of self, and emotions that make us human, happiness, anger, sadness, and joy. And I started to feel insecurity, and I started to feel empathy, and I started to feel all these things. But the thing that terrified me the most is that I started to have questions around my sexuality. So to set that up, that was my greatest fear in life, is that I would be gay. I grew up in the church since I was young. I've had a huge heart. I've wanted to work at a church. I've wanted to work in ministry. I've wanted to preach the gospel. But I knew if I was gay, then I probably couldn't do any of that. And so anytime I ever felt any kind of attraction or drawn, I learned to cut it off and bury it. And in fact, I had this awesome room that was in a dungeon, locked with a lot of locks, and I had 30-foot ceilings around it that were all cement, and I actually had a moat around it. It's like, that's where I put anything that involved my sexuality. And just when I was moving to LA, I felt God ask me, Laura, I feel like we need to address these woundings around your concepts of femininity and masculinity and just sexuality in general. And I was terrified by that. I was terrified because I was that good Christian girl. I was in the word all the time. I renewed my mind. I meditated. I prayed the gay away. I fled from sexual immorality. I didn't put myself in temptation. I was so good at controlling this issue. It would never come to the surface. But I remember God told me something that changed my life. He said, Laura, as long as that issue is regulated by religion, which is what you're doing, you'll never find freedom. Only my grace is going to heal this. And so I know you're terrified, but I need you to let these walls down and let me touch this. Let me touch this. And I was so scared. I was like, okay, God, I'm 27. I just came from Bible college. I've spent my whole life doing things for you. Please don't ruin this for me, but okay, I'm gonna take it down. Next thing you know, I fell in love with a girl. Dang it. And literally, my worst nightmare was coming true. And it was the beginning of a shame spiral for me. I can't even begin to tell you how disqualified and dirty and just sad I was, because I felt like every vision I had for my life, I had to give it up now. I couldn't do it. I gotta be gay, or I don't know. And just the burden of feeling like I could either love God or be true to myself. And I wasn't sure which one I wanted to give up. And then God just began to take me on this journey. And I'll never forget, I was crying in my room one day, just processing everything, just oh my gosh, I can't believe I allowed myself to do this, shame spiral. And God spoke this to me, and this also changed my life. He said, Laura, I know right now you are blindsided by this, okay? I get it. However, I have known since day one, that this was gonna happen to you. And even knowing that this was gonna happen, I still put these dreams in your heart. I still put this gifting on your life. I brought people in your life to speak into you and invest in you and get you to a place. Just because you're gay doesn't mean I don't wanna keep using you. And he said, your works never qualified you, so why do they disqualify you now? And that statement for the next 3 years and into 2020 has stuck with me. Because every time I get triggered with shame, and every time I feel like I can't do this, even right now, being on this stage, letting people know that I'm kind of queer a little bit, still figuring it out. If you're cute and you love Jesus, hit me up. Anyways, it's my reminder, but it's every time I feel God's no, you were never qualified by your works. Keep going. Keep going. And if I'm being super honest, being gay went from being the worst thing that could have happened to me to being the absolute best, because it forced me into the depths of God's insurpassable riches of his grace. And I got to lay down all the ways that I ever tried to earn God's love or be Christian enough. Because that's the thing, is when we're wounded, we don't do these things so that God loves us more. We do these things so that we can be loved by God. And God was like, you've heard this verse your whole life, Ephesians 2, that talks about it's by grace you've been saved through faith, not from your works. And yet here you are, and you're 30 years old, and you're finally experiencing it. You are a product of grace. It has never come from what you do. I need you to keep going, and I love you as is. So I'm going to close by saying, I am so honored that we get to be a part of New Abbey, because every week we get reminded that God is always taking us on a journey of liberation. And he's always taking us on a journey where we get to be freed as we allow God's love and grace and acceptance to define our personhood and who we are. So love you guys. Thanks, Corey.
No, don't go anywhere. Come back here. Wow. One, I'm just fired up that I don't have to give a sermon now, so that's great. We'll just save that one for next week. I hope you go with God on that. That was so good. But before you go, please tell them our favorite story that we share together.
All right, so I
Yeah.
have to tell this story because Corey
I
always butchers
ruin
it.
it every single time.
So
Yeah.
Corey and I like to walk around Whole Foods together, and it's the best.
It's a weird thing.
It's a weird
We
relationship.
get green smoothies and walk around Whole Foods.
And I like to close refrigerators.
Yeah. it's,
Anyways, moving on.
Pre-COVID.
So we were
Pre-COVID.
chatting, and I was like, he's like, oh, you're a coach. That means you wear polos. I said, no way, man. I like to wear dresses and heels. I like to look my best on game day. And then he was like, well, why don't you like polos? I'm like, oh, polos make me feel gay. And he looked at me and he goes, wait, so when you're kissing girls, you don't feel gay, but when you wear a polo, you do. And I said, yes, I feel. So there you go.
There you go.
Corey loves it.
everybody.
He eats it
Yeah,
up.
I love it. I love it.
He's more
I love
self-aware
it.
about
There you
myself
go.
than
There you go.
me.
Thank you so much. I feel closer to Jesus just from hearing that. So good. Man, I love our community so much. I love the diversity of who we are, the narratives of who people are. I just think it's so incredible. We were getting trolled this week by somebody. I always love when we get a nice troller on an email asking us about our beliefs and our statements and what we believe on sexuality. And one of the freedoms that I have for this world is people are just missing the point when we talk about sexuality. God does not care what skin touches what skin. That is uninteresting. God cares about who you are as a human being. You can make unhealthy sexual choices, but it has nothing to do with your preference. And I love that we're telling a bigger story that frees people from that, so that we're no longer just having these conversations and asking these giant questions of missing the point. We're just wasting so much energy there when we could be putting energy towards liberating people and freeing people to live full lives. We're going to get into question time. I love this opportunity. I say it every week. I know if you're an extrovert, you're probably just so excited for conversation time. You just need to get out words today and hit your quota. And if you're an introvert, you're like, man, I am going to go grab some brunch right now and come back in a little bit. Would you take a risk? Would you have an opportunity to get to hear somebody's story or maybe even share your story? You can click on the Connect with Us button on your tabs, or they're providing a Zoom link for you. And they're going to send you out into Zoom groups, and we're going to answer this question together. What do you want right now, and what do you need? Light question for you. Enjoy. It was the early 1900s, and it's crazy to think about this reality, that how small the world was even 120 years ago, that there was so much of even planet Earth that we hadn't explored yet. That in the early 1900s, there was all these countries who were racing to see who was going to get the first person to the South Pole. That we didn't have GPS and satellites and technology. We didn't have vehicles that could take us across the Antarctic. That it was people racing in these huge expeditions on wooden ships with sails to get people to Antarctica, to get across Antarctica 1,000 miles to the South Pole with dogs and like old school jackets. That there was this person named Ernest Shackleton who was this amazing explorer, and I love leadership at every level. I love reading about leadership, from CEOs to social activists to everybody and anybody that you can think of somebody who takes risks in their life. I find it so fascinating to see the diversity of people's journeys and their willingness to do something radical, their willingness to take a risk and how that risk benefits the rest of humanity. And what I love about reading all these leadership books and hearing these different stories is that there's not a common thread between everybody. Anybody at any moment has the capacity, right? Like a Rosa Parks sitting on that bus in that moment to say, not today. Today I will not move. Anybody has the capacity, like Nelson Mandela, to go through his life and say, I will risk sitting in prison for 30 years and participate in nonviolence if it gives my people an opportunity for something more. Ernest Shackleton in the early 1900s was this leader who wanted to explore the world, that his entire journey was external, that everything about himself was believing and asking these bigger questions of, man, how does a human being get to the place that no other human being has been before? And early in the 1900s, as he was on his way to the South Pole, he got within 60 miles and somebody else beat him there. So for him, it was, well, what's the next adventure for human beings? And for him, it was no one has ever crossed the entire Antarctic shelf. So him and a team of about 30 people prepared, and they went down on a ship, and they were going to cross all of Antarctica, and they were going to have another ship meet them on the other side. And early into their journey, a storm came early and it froze all of the area around them, crushed their ship in the ice. And for the next 400 days, these people survived in Antarctica. And they found something within themselves to survive. The capacity of human beings, the resilience that we have within us is unimaginable. That every day they wanted to quit, but because of leadership, because of asking bigger questions, because of dependency on one another, there was a few of those people who got on a tiny little boat and navigated 1,000 miles of seas in the frozen Antarctica to go get help. And it's one of the wildest stories that I've ever read, that every part of this story about Ernest Shackleton is just riveting. You can find it in a book called Endurance, and I love it, and I recommend it to everybody. But what I find so interesting about Ernest Shackleton's life is that at the end of it, after he had completed all of these adventures, after he had explored parts of the world that no other human being had ever been to, that he went back to Elephant Island, not just off the coast, hundreds of miles off the coast of Antarctica, where he had navigated his little boat to save all of the men who were in his party, that he went back there to go on another adventure, and there he had a heart attack and died. And then as you read the stories about Ernest Shackleton, this incredible leader who had done so much, who had taken people where people had never gone before, there was still this truth that's true of him, that's true of so many of us, that so often we go on these external journeys to find ourselves. So often we risk so much externally, but are we doing the work internally? That at the end of the day, his relationship with his spouse, his relationship with other people was problematic. And these great adventures were always a way of escaping the real troubling waters that were going on with inside of himself. And what I so believe about Jesus is that Jesus is constantly trying to increase the depths and the capacity of who we are internally. That the kingdom of God is not found here and there. They even asked Jesus of God, where is this kingdom you keep speaking of? Well, this kingdom is within you. This kingdom is a reality and a perspective of how you engage into the world. Will you bring heaven to earth by the way that you live within yourself and then allow that to go externally without you? And one of the weaknesses of Christianity, Western Christianity, over the last 200 years, and particularly of evangelicalism, is that we constantly send people on these external journeys. We constantly send people to other external authorities. If you would just believe enough in the Bible, if you would just read enough of these stories, if you would just participate enough in this tradition, if you would just listen to this senior pastor or this priest, these people out there on this journey somewhere at that camp with that prayer, that's the thing that's going to save you. But the truth of Jesus, the reason that we're in the story of how does the Bible work, is that from early Judaism all the way from Abraham, when this old man and woman heard this voice of God that says, I have an adventure to send you on. Not one that's external, but one where you will learn to trust and grow and love and find kindness and goodness within yourselves. From the stories of Moses and the burning bush to Elijah on a mountaintop, hearing thunder and storms and fire, but God was within. To the story of Jesus, these are not grand external stories that we go into. The story of Jesus is, this is your story. Will you learn to do the internal journey to grow yourself? It's here that you'll find healing. It's here that you'll find transformation. It's here that you'll find maturity. This is the place that the kingdom of God grows. But we've been sending people out there to find something that's not there, when where God was hiding the entire time was always within ourselves. That the gift of God has always been within each and every one of us. It's just a matter if we have eyes to see and ears to hear that this good news and good gift has been here the entire time. So to talk more about this, we got to talk about some things. We already talked a little bit about Shackleton. And after we talked about Shackleton, then of course, we got to talk about some Samaritans on a August morning in 2020. And if we're going to understand Samaritans, then we're going to move from this idea that we need to stop taking it literally and take it more seriously. And if we can begin to understand truth seriously and move away from the fundamentalism of literally where we all start, then maybe we can have an experience. And if we can experience something, can we grow up as human beings and move from the wants that we all have to the deeper needs of what it means to be human? And as we understand our needs, then maybe we could experience contentment, or satisfaction. And if we could be satisfied, then we can live into the deepest reality of who Jesus is, which is incarnation, which is this idea that God and humanity have always been intertwined. Not some story that Jesus needed to bleed out on a cross to make God less angry with you, which is unfortunately this external story that we've constantly been telling. And if we can understand the realities of incarnation, then, my friends, namaste. All right, let's do some things on a Sunday morning. Follow along with me in John chapter 4. John chapter 4. He had to go through Samaria on the way, and eventually he came to the Samaritan village of Sychar near the field that Jacob gave to his son Joseph. Jacob's well was there, and Jesus, tired from the long walk, sat wearily beside the well about noontime. Soon a Samaritan woman came to draw water, and Jesus said to her, "Please give me a drink." He was not alone at the time because his disciples had gone into the village to buy some food. The woman was surprised, for Jews refused to have anything to do with Samaritans. She said to Jesus, "You are a Jew, and I am a Samaritan woman. Why are you asking me for a drink?" Jesus replied, "If you only knew the gift God has for you, and you who you are speaking to, you would ask me, and I would give you living water. But sir, you don't have a rope or a bucket," she said, "and this well is very deep. Where would you get this living water? And besides, do you think you're greater than our ancestor Jacob, who gave us this well? How can you offer better water than he and his sons and his animals enjoyed?" And Jesus replied, "Anyone who drinks this water will soon become thirsty again. But those who drink the water I give will never be thirsty again. It becomes a fresh, bubbling spring within them, giving them eternal life." "Please, sir," the woman said, "give me this water, then I'll never be thirsty again, and I won't have to come here to get water." In Jesus' time, Samaritans were these people that nobody had interactions with. That Jesus is a good Jew, and you know that because you've been following along in this series of How Does the Bible Work. And good Jews in Jesus' day didn't associate with other Samaritans. That back in the day, when Jews were exiled to Babylon, all of the educated, the priests, all the people who were in charge were the people who were taken to another country, and it was kind of the hillbillies who were left behind. So when all of those Jews came back and they were building a new temple, they had found that some of these Samaritans had shifted and kind of evolved and pivoted a little bit in the Jewish faith. That they had moved their understanding of God from the city of Jerusalem more up north to a different kind of little bit understanding of who God was in their world. So the Jews who had gone away were the people who thought to themselves at this time, well, we're the ones who endured hardship and we were taken to foreign lands and we were the ones who were faithful and who God used. So you people who were left behind, you were kind of the people who didn't really follow God in those ways. And I know that if you've been in church long enough, you've met some religious people with a superiority complex. And this is what was going on in that time as well. That in Jesus' day, these Samaritans were people who were inferior to the Jews. It's the middle of the day, and I love the story, and you got to really set the scene in your mind here, that Jesus is a rabbi. And we don't really have a good concept of rabbis in our world. That rabbis were these people who always had disciples and followers coming behind them. So you knew when a rabbi came into your town because they rolled up with their squad, Escalades and all, my friends. And so when they rolled up, you always knew who this rabbi was and what this rabbi was about. But in this narrative, the rest of the team had gone somewhere else in this moment, and it's just Jesus in the middle of the day, and we're in the Middle East, by the way. We don't know the time of the year, but we do know this, that the story says that Jesus was tired. That the Son of Man, right, that the God-man leans up next to a well, scorching hot on a noonday, and sits next to a well all by himself. That he was fatigued and worn out. And this good Jewish rabbi asked the Samaritan who you're not supposed to speak to, would you be able to provide for me some of the needs that I have? How different is this story already? That most of us were given a story of Jesus where it's completely external, and Jesus is the one that does all of the work on the cross, and when we just raise our hands and name it and proclaim it, Jesus will take away all of the bad things from us. We will not endure suffering, and our lives will be okay until you suffered, until the prayer didn't work. And you wouldn't be prepared for this kind of story. In this story, the woman is not running to Jesus asking for water. In this story, Jesus asked the most marginalized person, within you have something to give me. Isn't that interesting? How God works. That God was setting up for this person. You think that you're not worthy because you're a Samaritan. You think that you're not worthy because you're a woman in the Middle East 2,000 years ago in a Roman society where you're not even considered a human being. You think that you're not worthy because you're the kind of woman who's lived such an adulterous life for the last few years that you've had 5 different husbands, which is in the story later. Feel free to read that in your bathroom time, John chapter 4, not 5, just to be clear. And Jesus tells the story. You think you're not worthy for all of these reasons. You think you're not worthy because you were gay. You think you're not worthy because of these choices that you made. You think you're not worthy because you're family of origin. You think you're not worthy because of the color of your skin. You think you're not worthy because of what this person said to you in that relationship. You think you're not worthy because of how mom and dad treated you. We all have laundry lists of things within us of why we think we're not worthy. Why we are not good enough, why we don't have enough to show up for this day. And Jesus in this story comes and says, I'm here to break down all of those boundaries, all of those barriers, all of those walls to remind you that the goodness that you've been looking for has always been within you. Where is God? He's been in there the whole time. She's been within you every step of the way. In the brokenness, in the pain, in the hurt, in the figuring it out, in the atrocities and trauma that should have never happened to you. Even there, in the most God-forsaken places, God was always showing up. That even Jesus on a cross shouts out, my God, why have you forsaken me? And it is through that crucifixion and through that death and through that pain, through the loneliness, through the betrayal, that we get resurrection, my friends. Never a journey that we would wish upon anybody, but all of us know the deep truth that we found God when we had nothing else. And here 2,000 years ago, next to a well that gives water, was a woman who was showing up, and she was showing up by herself in the middle of the day because no one else would be there because it was hot as fuck. And there is this rabbi who is there saying, you actually have something to offer me. Stop telling a narrative about your life that is rooted in your worthiness. Let's start telling a narrative in your life where the goodness of God has always been bubbling up within you. And the story will go on in John chapter 4 after they talk about all of her husbands, and she's amazed, and she'll go tell this entire village, and they'll come back, and they'll all just live in joy of this story of good news and who Jesus is, and they're all surprised, and they all want to follow Jesus, and it's beautiful, and it builds, and again, you can read that all later, but the crux of the story, the power of the story, is that the journey within is the journey that we're on. Unfortunately, for the last 1,000 years within the church, particularly within the Western church, particularly as the Western church got ingrained in power and in government, and we wanted to make sure that the kings and queens who were in power really supported the church, we lost this internal journey. And we begin to talk about an external journey because it preserves power when we make sure that you have to go to an external source to find authority. But for the first 1,000 years of the church, this was one of the stories that was read to early followers of Jesus. And they would spend months here meditating on this story for the deeper truths of what it was about. Because if you were going to go on this journey of Jesus, you needed to trust and to believe and to see within yourself that the goodness and the gift of God was always within you in the first place. And this is the story that God has for us. And so if we're going to understand the truth that the gift of God has always been within us, then we need to understand this story seriously and not literally. Most of the external sources that we've been given, we're taught to take literally. We're taught to take the Bible literally, even though the Bible has not been read literally except for the last 150 years in modern Western thinking and culture, instead of to take the truth of the scriptures seriously. And then by literally, what we really mean is the particular flavor of Christianity that you were given, and we told you that these are the things that are found in the Bible, and if you do these things, then God will be happy with you. If you were a good Southern Baptist, the things that you would take literally is you would never have sex before marriage, you would never use alcohol, and you certainly wouldn't dance. And if you didn't do these external things, then maybe God would be satisfied with you. If you were charismatic, you were told externally, if you could just speak in tongues, then you'll know that God loves you. If you were Catholic, it was you needed to go through your catechisms and you needed to follow this tradition. And the priest and the pope, these are the truths that you will find. If you were evangelical, of course you had to listen to Amy Grant. these are just the way things work, my friends. And we can joke about all of these things, but there was a truth to all of the places that we came from, that we were told that there's an external authority out there somewhere, and if you just follow these things and do these things, then God will somehow be pleased with you. Instead of taking Scripture seriously and seeing the deeper truth rooted within it, that what God is always trying to show you is to actually trust yourself. The Scriptures, tradition, are not teaching you to be bigger lovers of them. The Scriptures and tradition are teaching you to be a bigger lover of yourself. And as you love yourself, as you find healing, as you find transformation here, as you grow up, then you'll begin to see God in new ways. And the miracle of the journey is, if you can believe that there's an eternal well of life always bubbling within you, how might you see other human beings? If you can believe that this good news and good gift is within you, could you also believe that this good news and this good gift is also within them? And if we can do that, imagine how the world changes when we stop doing all the things literally and we start taking seriously the truth that we're offered here. And one of the ways that we do this, how do we actually accomplish taking Scripture seriously, is that we surround ourselves through a diverse community of people. That it is through experiences with other human beings that we learn to love ourselves and love them better. Why? Because we live in 2020 in a place like Los Angeles or wherever you're tuning in from. And what you'll find is that their story is different than your story, and somehow God's grace and God's love was able to hold the complexity of both of those things together. And when you can hear how God worked differently in them, how will that also teach you to trust and love how God is working within you, and vice versa? And so we need a diversity of experiences with each other. I was having a conversation with a couple this week at New Abbey. And they're gay, and they were talking about the world that they grew up in, evangelicalism. They were always scared to show PDA as somebody who was gay because they were just so ingrained within them that it will make everybody else uncomfortable if they saw two gay men kissing. And I said, okay, those are the beliefs that you used to have, but what about now? And that those things were still rooted within them. And I'm saying, well, go ahead and make out right now in front of me. For all I care, you love one another, and you should do that. And one of the things that begins to bring them freedom is that they get to be in a community with other gay people, and they get to experience the love and affection and PDA that they have, and they also get to be in a community with other straight people who don't think that it's abnormal, who realize these are just human beings who love one another, that we need each other and our vastly different experiences to affirm and create acceptance for who we are. We don't just need people who are like us. They would talk about walking through Chicago into Boys Town and saying, well, once we cross that imaginary line, then we could hold hands. But then they talked about the magic of this moment when they were in a city on a subway in the non-gay community, and they held hands for the first time, and the energy and the lightning that happened between them. And isn't that the gift that God has for you? That we need each other's experiences to say, it's okay to love who you want to love. It's okay to be who you want to be. And you need other people to help validate that truth and experience within you. But you must first love and validate that experience for yourself. And we need that reality. And if we can have this reality of finding a deeper truth about who we are and that the gift of God has always been within us, then I think we grow up in understanding what our wants are and what our needs are. At our earliest stages of life, we have a bunch of needs. We got to eat, we got to poop, we need our diaper changed. There's just things that happen. And eventually, as we get a little bit older, we start to have wants. I have a 3, 5, and 7-year-old. I hear a lot of wants every day. Yesterday, I was gone on a little trip, and my 5-year-old kept FaceTiming us and asking, Dad, did you find me a toy somewhere? I need a toy wherever you go. It's just a want that we have. And as we grow up, some of those wants change. As we grow up, some of our wants stay material, and we think, if I just get this thing, if I just had that job, if I can finally drive this car, if I made this much money, or actually, we don't even say this much money, we just say more money, as if there's like a magical number there in which you'd be like, now I am satisfied. But you're not. We have all these external needs, but what happens when we can move those wants to saying, actually, all that I have right now is exactly what I need, and I feel content and satisfied in it. For those of us who've experienced addiction, it's a world filled with wants. It's a world filled with, if I could just have this drink or this hit or screw this person or do whatever I need to do, then today I'll be satisfied. But what you learn is it wasn't even about getting the hit that made you satisfied. It was about the act of trying to go get that thing that was giving you a high. And then when you actually got the thing, you were quite dissatisfied with your life. And what we moved towards is this want was never going to satisfy me. I lived lots of years as my life as a sex addict thinking that if I just had this kind of sex or did this kind of thing or if I got married young enough, then my life would be satisfied. And it wasn't through a process, it wasn't until a process of healing and transformation and maturity, recognizing that the goodness of God has always been within me, that I don't need to go pursue that want externally, where I realized I'm not longing for sex, I want intimacy. I want to hold and know somebody and be known because I trust and know that I am good and that I am whole and that I am trustworthy inside. We can go on and name all of the wants in our culture, but these wants are rooted in some belief that if externally I could just get that, then I'll finally be satisfied. And Jesus comes to the well and sits next to each and every one of us and says, I know that you don't feel worthy. I know that you think you wouldn't have something to offer, but within you and you and you and all of you, the gift and goodness of God is already there. And it's like a bubbling stream that keeps coming up and it never runs out. That within this stream, unlike all of the external wants around you, where if you could just get a little bit of that or a taste of this, and immediately it disappears and it vanishes. This bubbling fountain that's within you, when you take 1,000,000 away from infinity, you still have infinity. That when you go towards this grace upon grace upon grace upon grace, it never runs out because the gift of God has always been within you. So we need to take more seriously that reality that we don't need these external sources to give us truth about who we are, that we can begin to trust within ourselves that who God is will actually satisfy and fulfill our needs. And that one of the ways that we do that is that we can begin to practice gratitude every time that our needs are actually met. That for me as a sex addict, when I could actually say, oh, it was the intimacy, God, and in trusting myself and recognizing my goodness today, thank you, that I realized that I don't actually need this thing. And when I begin to reorient and retell the narrative of my life, it began to change and transform something within me. That I didn't need to run after all of these things out here, but that goodness and that wealth and that love was already within me. And that the truth of this is all rooted in this idea of incarnation. That the truth of it is this, that the story of Jesus in this world is not a story where the God-man comes to earth to die so that God will finally be happy with you. The story of the God-man is coming to earth as a human being so that you as a human being can realize that the divine has always been within you. And that it's through your journey of living, it's through your own crucifixions that there you experience resurrection. It's this journey that Jesus brings us all on internally that we would begin to trust who we are and what we have going on within ourselves. That's the journey of incarnation that we're invited into. I've mentioned it multiple times throughout this series of how does the Bible work, but for the first 1,000 years of the church, 1,000 years, that's a long time, just so you know. The pursuit of Jesus was the pursuit of theosis. Theosis was this fancy word that followers of this Christ and followers of this way were on a journey to realize that they were made in the image of God and the likeness of God. That's what theosis was. We would maybe say it this way now, but we've kind of, messed it up a little bit. That somehow we're trying to be like saved by God and sanctified or be more holy, but then it starts to get rooted in some external morality which none of us can keep. Instead of this beautiful story of you are liberated, you are saved, you are freed by the reminder that Jesus brings that you have always been made in the image of God. It is not a magical prayer. It is not a specific flavor of church. It is not reading enough of the Bible. It's not the things that you do and don't do. But within you, from day one, for every moment of human beings in their existence, you have been made in the image of God. And as you are freed into that, as you are liberated into that narrative, as you follow this way of Jesus, then you move into the likeness of God. Because as you experience this freedom that is within you, it begins to change who you are, that you're more gentle and that you're more kind and how you're filled with hope and gratitude, how you encounter the suffering and the pain and the brokenness of your life, so that as your hurts are reoriented and refiltered through this goodness that is bubbling up within you, you don't now just go hurt other people, but now instead of hurting people, you as a transformed person will transform other people. This is the journey that Jesus has for you. One in which you trust yourself and trust the freedom, liberation, salvation that Jesus brings you, and that now as you follow this way of Jesus, you move into this path of being more like who Jesus is. And in being more like who Jesus is, now you get to go sit at some wells of other people's lives, and you get to remind them of the deepest truth. I know you don't feel worthy, but that thing within you, that divine spark, that magic, you too have always been made in the image of God. And namaste is the saying that people offer one another in greeting, because it says, I bow to the divine that is within you, and you bow to the divine that is within me. This is the practice of Jesus. This is the deeper truth that is embedded within the universe, that we would see and hear more clearly that God has always been in each and every one of us. And so this morning as I was leaving the house, I was saying goodbye to all of my kids and Carissa, and I was saying to them as I was stepping down the stairs to go into the garage, do you guys know who my favorite people is? And Caden says, of course, Dad, we're your favorite people. And I said, I know, because I love you so much. He says, but Dad, I know you love us so much, but first you have to love yourself. Because if you can't love yourself, how could you love us? Said a 7-year-old on Sunday morning at 8:30 a.m., my friends. Preach the gospel, am I right? And he is living in a world that we are creating, where we're gonna tell all the little 7-year-olds, whoever you are, wherever you are made in the image of God. You will learn to love internally your source. You will not depend on all these external sources to give you validation and truth and acceptance and affirmation of who you are. And as you, this next generation, live into a new reality where police officers don't shoot young men, where somebody never has to come out again, where white people with privilege use their power to create new opportunities of wealth and transformation in the world, wherever you find yourself and whoever you are, this will be a generation that knows the deeper truth and good news of Jesus, that the gift of God has always been within you. Namaste, my friends. We're gonna get back in our groups and we're gonna ask these questions with one another. Where do you see the gift of God inside of you? Enjoy.